Welcome to the MixMasters Podcast, a program created by me, Steve Litscher, live sound engineer for the band Stitched Up Heart. I created this podcast during the COVID pandemic as a means to keep in contact with my friends and mentors from the live sound industry. Touring with Stitched Up Heart has led me to meet some really incredible people, and I wanted to introduce you to their stories. So whether you're an experienced engineer, a hobbyist, or someone who's just wondered what goes into mixing a live music show, this podcast is for you. I've got to thank my friend Merritt Goodwin for this killer intro music. Merritt is the lead guitarist for Stitched Up Heart, and he's an incredible musician and composer. Give him a shout on Facebook at Merritt Goodwin or on Instagram at Doubt the Trust. Thanks again for joining me. Now let's bring up the faders and start the podcast. My guest for this episode is Jerry Depew. Jerry is one of those guys who has done a little bit of everything, and his story is quite interesting. It took us a little bit to get into the heavier sound-related discussion here, but his history and experiences make it worth the wait. I met Jerry some years ago while attending a rational acoustics class, and we hit it off pretty quickly. We both liked the same type of music, we enjoyed checking out the Nashville food scene, and we used a lot of the same gear in similar types of venues. Jerry's personality is infectious, and his knowledge of system tuning and mixing is vast and deep. Jerry lives in the Peoria, Illinois area with his wife and family, and when he's not spending time with them, he's either on stage shredding his guitar or out front nailing the mix. He's worked with an incredible range of artists and groups, including Kip Winger, Mike Tramp of White Lion, Puddle of Mud, Saving Abel, Autograph, and countless other bands that were hugely popular in the late 80s and early 90s. Jerry recently wrote a book about tuning PA systems, and I'd highly recommend it. It's geared toward the amateur sound guy or smaller venue owner, but the advice and information is solid and useful for anyone that's interested or involved in our business. You can find it on Amazon. You can also find and follow Jerry online. I've included links to his information in the show notes for this episode. I hope you'll enjoy learning more about Jerry and his sound production experiences. And there are a few reasons his friends refer to him as Dr. J, so let's jump in and find out why that is. Without further ado, I present to you Jerry Depew. Jerry, I'd like to welcome you to MixMasters Podcast and thank you for taking time out of your day to be on the show with me.
Good to be here.
Cool. So for those who may not be familiar with Jerry, I met Jerry while attending a SMART class or rational acoustics course, I guess, while in Nashville, Tennessee, a couple of years ago, and we ended up sitting next to each other in the class, and we sort of started to hit it off. I think I must not have driven you away with all of my silly questions because you still talk to me.
Right?
Yeah, you're probably regretting that right now. But as I got to know Jerry, I've gone down to visit him where he lives and works in Peoria, Illinois, and learned a lot about the Midas Pro consoles from him. So Jerry, I thought it'd be really fun to get you on the podcast and have people get to know a little bit more about you and some of your experiences because you've done a lot of really cool things. We'll talk about those in just a few minutes. But I'd like to step back for a second and start a little bit earlier in your musical adventure and talk to you a little bit about when did you get started in music? What got you started in music? And are you a musician? Or just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with music.
Well, it started when I was about, 16, 17 years old. I actually do play guitar. I've been playing since, I was 16, I guess. But it started there and, with just being in the bands and that kind of thing over the years, being around music and being on the stage playing, being around PA systems, sound systems, and all that kind of thing that just over time, I just ended up developing an interest in doing sound. So, but yeah, I started off as a guitar player and just went from there.
And you still play guitar today, correct?
Yeah, I do. Not as much as I used to. I'm not in a full-time band at the moment anymore, but I'll pick it up and play it.
Yeah, it's hard to put it down after you start plucking away. It seems to stick with you throughout your life. At least that's been what I hear from other
Right.
people and what I experience as well. Um, when you were playing music, did you have the opportunity to play on any sort of bigger stages or venues or events or anything like that?
When I first started playing guitar, I actually was in a band with the guitar player in Mudvayne, Greg Tribbett. He The band that we played in, he was actually the bass player because we already had, two guitar players in the band. So, but he wanted to. He's actually a guitar player, but switched to bass and played bass for quite a while just to get involved in the scene and that kind of thing. So, but then we eventually ended up in other band projects where he played guitar and that kind of thing. And we did that for quite a while, probably, I don't know, from high school over the next 10 years or so until we kind of split doing the music or doing the band thing. And I started to go back to college and he pursued other music interests and that kind of thing. So,
That's
I mean,
that's an interesting situation to be in where the guitarist from Mudvayne has to play bass in your band. You guys must have been pretty solid if you got him to take on that role.
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny looking back on it now. We still joke about it.
Yeah, that's and I know you've stayed in pretty close contact with the Mudvayne guys. We won't go into too much detail around that, but I think you shared with me that you had like demo CDs from them at one point and some pretty cool experiences around with them.
I do. I have some early demos that they did that Greg dropped off to me. That's actually on cassette tape.
Wow.
Very raw, very aggressive, but very raw. And my brother-in-law actually has recorded those guys. Some of the earlier stuff. So
Wow.
we've been around those guys quite a bit.
Oh, that's awesome. I have the advantage of knowing you personally and hanging out with you, so I may be a little bit too casual with some of the with some of the questions. So I'll do my best to try and assume that people listening don't know you quite as well as I do. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
so if I jump into something and you think it needs to be, have a little more backstory, by all means, just back up and take us from wherever you think is appropriate. Okay,
sure.
so you were working in bands, you were around music, you were a musician, and your brother-in-law had some familiarity around sound equipment, and that got you interested in doing sound. When would you say you made the transition more into being a sound engineer and less of a guitar player?
Well, we were doing the club circuit thing, playing in a band, and I remember many times of playing um, and doing like guitar solos and that kind of thing at where excuse me, where people would say, I could tell that you were really tearing it up, but man, I just couldn't hear a dang thing that you were playing. So it got, after having this repeated over and over again, it just got frustrating to the point to where, in my mind, since I have a science background, being in school and all that kind of thing, which, that's a big part of my past too. I actually quit playing guitar to go back to college for a while. I just knew that it was, pretty possible that I could dig into this sound thing and maybe see if I can come up with something different,
Yeah,
and actually make, guitar solos heard, make vocalists heard, that kind of thing. So, but yeah, it was interesting thing. But actually, it was my wife that suggested it one day. She's like, why don't we buy our own PA and run it ourselves and that kind of thing. So by doing that, and of course we're in a band running the sound ourselves, so that created a whole bunch of other issues. But I had my father-in-law that was able to step in and take care of that. All in the meantime, while I try to figure out, what is it about these sound systems that, whether it was a great system or it was a cheap system, it didn't, in a lot of ways, it didn't seem to matter what was going on out there. It just, uh, things just weren't sounding the way that I could hear them in my head.
Yeah.
So I just kept diving into it until, you know, I had that light bulb moment where I'm like, okay, I know where I need to go with this.
I think at one point you told me that it was your wife's suggestion to start your own sound company so that you could save some money. That's
Yeah.
that rarely works out though.
Yeah. So, we're like, she's like, just think of how much money we could save by not have to pay sound guys. But, you know, here I am, 10 years down the road
Yeah.
thinking, oh my gosh, you know,
I would have saved a lot
uh,
more had I kept paying those sound guys.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, gear, the gear alone is, extremely expensive, so,
Yeah. Yep.
but,
Yeah.
anyway.
And then I want to take another quick little step back. Your friends call you Dr. J for a couple of reasons, but one of them is that you're actually a doctor.
I'm a doctor of chiropractic.
Yep.
I, became a chiropractor, and that's kind of, part on the backstory there of playing in the bands and all that. I made a trip out to LA in the early 90s, and it was eye-opening to me because this was at the point that some of the bigger bands or some of the bands like Nirvana and, a lot of those Seattle type bands were coming on the scene. So all the bands that I grew up listening to, which I liked a lot, like Rat and Dokken, TNT, bands like that, they weren't as popular for some reason anymore. So my little visit out to LA just kind of showed me that, that bands could, if they could, as long as they were selling records, they could be, they could stay signed and they could do a lot of cool things. But if they weren't selling records, no matter how good they were, then um, that was a whole nother thing. So basically, I decided that it was time for me to try to do something different. And I had always wondered what it would be like to go back to school and that kind of thing. So I made the jump and went back to college. And then as time went on, um, you start seeing more possibilities of doing some other things, which kind of led me to go into the field of chiropractic, which I ended up, I've been a chiropractor for 20 years now, but I was in active practice for probably about 13
Wow.
years.
Yeah, in our line of work, knowing something about your back is probably a good thing for multiple reasons.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I never had back problems until I started a production company, and then all of a sudden I was visiting the chiropractor and everybody that I could find that could try and hopefully fix that thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I love chiropractic and all that. I love it, but the business side of it is there's a lot of red tape involved in it, especially with today's healthcare. But the real reason why I got out of it is that my draw to doing live sound just kept growing and growing, and I started being asked to do mix for a lot of bands and doing some of these big 80s 90s bands that were popular at one time. They're rolling through town. A lot of YouTube bands, stuff like that. So that draw was, I was being asked to do that so much, and I started getting so involved in that I'm like, I could just totally do this and not worry about the practice anymore, because it was getting to a point where, me and my wife were really, having difficult time with dealing with insurance and all that kind of thing.
Oh
So
yeah.
we talked about it and decided, you can't always. We just went with what we wanted to do. Went with our passions, and then just closed up shop and just started doing sound full time.
Wow, That's pretty crazy. I mean, that's a leap of faith, but it also demonstrates, I think, the confidence in your abilities and your capabilities that you could, step away from the medical field, chiropractic, and then start a production company and start doing that full time. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
How many? And that was what, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I would say it's probably 10 years ago.
Wow, crazy. I know in Peoria, aside from doing your own production work and whatnot, you also work with a company called Advanced Audio and Lighting. And I think you've done quite a range of things with them. You've done corporate gigs, the talking head type of things, mixing tours that are coming through or festivals that are in the area, um, concerts of every imaginable size, from bar bands and clubs to the aforementioned theaters and arenas and whatnot. Can you talk a little bit about your role at Advanced Audio and sort of what you do on a day-to-day basis and some of the experiences that you've had there?
Basically, what I do there is I'm the warehouse manager. So anything and everything that comes in and out of there, out of that place through shipping or receiving, or through rentals, or whatever, I'm in charge of. So it's kind of a broad title that where I have a lot of different things going on inside that. But basically, I'm the one that's responsible for keeping track of everything that comes in and out of the building, including all of our rental inventory, all of our install gear, everything. We have a live production side, and then we also have an installation side where we do, some pretty high tech multimedia installations and different companies and so forth. So it's pretty diverse.
Yeah, and you guys have a pretty interesting selection of equipment. I think you've got obviously Midas Pro desks there. You've got a pretty big RCF array, a couple of those systems. You got some Avid and Profile. Am I missing anything else that you guys sort of specialize in?
Yeah, I mean, we have some Danley boxes as well that we use for, like for some speaking corporate events where, the emphasis is on speaking or
Right.
speech, that kind of thing. But yeah, we have 3 or 4 Midas desks there, a Profile. I,
Yep.
I think, yeah, we actually have an LS9 as well. It's a little dinky thing, but it gets used every now and again. And then, of course, we got a handful of walkout rental mixers as well. Like
Sure.
some touch mixes and stuff like that. But
Yeah. No, that's cool. I came down to visit you, I think last year, before heading out with Stitched Up Heart, because I was thinking I was going to be on a Midas Pro desk, with opening for a larger act, but we ended up carrying our own. And you gave me a crash course in the Pro, so I appreciate that. I don't know if I ever properly thanked you, but thank you for giving me the ins and outs on that Pro.
yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, you're in Peoria these days. Well, actually, I think right now you're down in Florida enjoying some R&R while all of us are sitting idle thanks to COVID. Um,
I'm quarantining in Florida. That's correct.
there's probably worse places. I think it's probably a little warmer and a little sunnier than it is in Peoria.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but when you've been in Peoria and working in the role of front of house engineer, you've worked with some pretty interesting acts that have come through, and I know you've been in some pretty also, we should say, interesting environments. Things that come to mind are like doing sound for Kip Winger, Mike Tramp from White Lion, Puddle of Mud, Autograph, and then you've also, in addition to those, sort of legendary mainstream acts, you've done some shows with prisons, like penitentiaries, and then also Corey Feldman. Do you want to take us through some of those more interesting gigs that you've worked on?
Which would you like me to start with?
let's
Let's do.
yeah,
Let's
whichever you feel
let's talk.
like.
We'll save the Feldman show for last.
All right,
Um,
deal.
let's go with okay. Like, well, we do some prison gigs, and So believe it or not, we're able to take some live production into a prison system and set up and do some shows for some. They're all pretty much national touring contemporary Christian bands that come in that want to talk to the inmates and they have a message and that kind of thing. So we basically just take a truck in there with some racks and stacks and put on a big show out in the field, out in the courtyard out there. But it's a great experience, but it's still pretty fun, man, because you know those guys really, they haven't seen anything like that in a while, so they're pretty excited about it.
Oh yeah. What do you do for power in a scenario like that? Do you guys bring a generator, or does the prison have enough power available to you?
So far, the places that we've been at, the three different state prisons that we've been at, have had power not too far away, actually.
Wow.
So we run 100 foot of feeder out to our distro or whatever, and just distribute the power from there. So we don't
Wow.
have to worry about lighting because these shows aren't at night; they're in the daylight, out in the open field with you know armed guards surrounding the outer perimeter. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird experience.
Do they have any sort of like noise ordinances for that for those events, or are
No, they don't. I remember going through a sound check with one of the bands, and the warden came up, and he was just kind of overshadowing me and that kind of thing. And I just asked him, I'm like, I want to be respectful and everything here. Can you? Does this seem like this is too loud? And he's like, I was just thinking that this is just not going to be loud enough. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I can fix that. So I'm like, I just want to make sure that that you're okay with it. And he's like, just let it rip, man.
Wow.
So, and that's pretty much what we did. So, we took a RCF rig in there. It was all ground stacked because it has to be. You can't fly anything in there.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a ground stack system, strapped down, and we just let it go, man. And it
Wow.
was awesome.
Do they do any sort of particular screening as you're going in and out, or what's the security like?
Yeah. So, everybody that goes in there, me and the guys, with the crew that I was with, we all had to be, you have to have background checks, so that kind of thing. And once you pass the background check, then you have to provide a highly detailed pack list, pretty much down to the cable, to the adapter, whatever.
Wow.
And then you in the meantime, you have to advance the show with the band. Um, and it's strange that these bands have front of house guys, but a lot of these front of house guys didn't end up coming to the show. So, I'm the one that ended up mixing them. So just by corresponding with them, you're trying to make sure that you've got everything that you need. So a lot of times we would overpack a little bit because we just didn't know. And but yeah, so as soon as you show up at the guard shack and check in, you start that process of going through that pack list with the guards.
Wow. They probably frown on you bringing cakes with files and whatnot as well.
What's that?
Oh, I must have lost you for a second. I was making a really bad joke, so it's we'll skip over that. All right.
Oh, you said cakes with files.
Yes.
Uh, right on. So yeah, we got these little quarter pack trunks, got cables in it and that kind of thing, and they'll just ask you, you don't plan on trying to sneak anybody out in those things. And one of the other guys is like, "There's no way a human could fit in there," and the guard was like, "You want to bet?" He's like, "You'd be surprised at what these guys will do."
Yeah, I can only imagine. Wow. And then do you find that working or mixing in that environment is sort of like being in a stadium. You've got walls all the way around you, sort of like you would a bowl in a stadium. But any particular challenges related to the environment?
Not really, because they're out in these big fields. So acoustically, it wasn't very challenging at all.
Yeah,
And but they would do we would do a early afternoon show and then a later in the afternoon show. So it'd be two shows. That way they could break up the inmate capacity. So we would do like a couple, 1,500 inmate shows. So they didn't want to bring them all out at once just because, for whatever security reasons. It's
sure.
easier to control the smaller group,
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah. Wow, that I've never talked to anybody who's done sound in a prison before. So thanks for sharing those stories and that experience. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about prisons. Let's talk about some of the other shows like working with the Wingers and the Autographs and the Bret Michaels and the Puddles of Mud and those guys. Anything, what do you find that they generally are looking for when they come into a theater or an arena in your area? And how do you go about preparing for those shows? And in a lot of instances, you're mixing those guys as well.
Right. Honestly, the first thing that they're looking for is that things are what they agreed upon, through either the buyer, the person that, the promoter, the person that, wants them to come in and that kind of thing. So when they get there, they want to make sure that, they're going to get, first things first, they want to get paid and they want to make sure that everything else is, correct. Um, whether it's hotel or hospitality writer
Sure.
and those kind of things. Very few of them actually came in and was ever really concerned about the sound system side of it. You know what I mean?
Wow. Why do you think that is? Do you think they're just so professional and they've got so many shows under their belt that they can make anything work, or something else?
I'm not real sure, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's
They,
interesting.
I'm not real sure, but I can speculate and say that, they're in a town that, on their way to the next town. So, they're there, they're going to fulfill the agreement, whether they have a rough night or not. And I've talked to plenty of them that have had really rough nights where they would show up and have only one functioning monitor wedge
Oh my.
or, and I mean, I've, there's a couple guys that said that they just weren't able to do the gigs.
Wow.
Um, so, but I try to avoid all that. I take really good gear in there, and allow myself the time to set it up properly, get it tuned up, get everything, up and running, wrung out, and basically ready to go. That way, when they get there and they walk out on the stage, they're not waiting on me, and we can get right to the, whatever they want to do, get right to the sound check or whatever. So,
Yeah, that's definitely appreciated. I've worked with a couple of artists that are, have been around the block a few times, and I've noticed what you've noticed, which they're usually the easiest to work with in most instances. Like they're just, if everything's working and everything is, intelligible, they're happy and they don't ask for anything, which always surprised me. I thought that it would be a lot more difficult working with those, that level of performer versus the local artist, that complains about everything and nothing is right, and no matter what you're doing, it's not going to be good enough all night. The smaller and the more local, it seems like the more challenges you have.
yeah, I would agree with that. It seems like the bands that are, they're starting to get some traction, or they're starting to get, are more noticeable, that some of these guys have a lot of concerns and that kind of thing. But the guys that have been out there doing it for a long, long time, I very rarely have had any trouble with those guys.
Yeah. Yep. So you started to talk a little bit about you like to get everything set up so that they're not waiting on you. And I know you've written a book about setting up, configuring, tuning PA systems specifically for smaller market venues like clubs and bars.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit through that.
Yeah.
What drove you to write
And
the book? And
I'm sorry.
oh no, you're going. I'm sorry. We've got sort of a wonky connection. So for everybody listening, apologies for that, and sorry, Jerry, for some of the latency there.
No problem. Yeah, that process of that I went through in the very beginning of taking, a passive speaker box, hooking it up to, some power amplifiers, using a crossover, and trying to make it all work together. That early stages of that process was, excuse me, it was kind of it was a real challenge, and by going through that process and learning how, to make things work a lot better, through uh, learning, like what a parametric EQ was, and then learning how to time align things and try to make this whole speaker system work as if it's one giant speaker. I was kind of enamored with that process when I finally realized that, this is how you achieve, a better sound, or at least a better position to get your PA in, so that you can mix. That, a lot of people that are out there doing sound, different places that I would go, I would see what's going on, and say, man, that is exactly where I started. Maybe I'll write a book about this someday, and hopefully that could help them out, because there's a lot of guys out there, if you talk to them, man, they're still using a bunch of different speaker boxes thrown together. They've got a graphic EQ on the left to right, and they're out there trying to manage everything just with that EQ. And I remember the first time that I had seen, I went and saw a band where a guy was back there and he's messing with that graphic EQ for the whole entire show. Didn't even look up at the band, didn't boost any guitar solos, didn't do much of anything. He was so focused on this graphic EQ that I thought, that that thing cannot be the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
And it forced me to take a look at what was going on and diving in. And then I learned more and more about how to tune systems. And so through that whole process, I decided that, one day I'm going to write a book about it all. And hopefully that could help some people that are getting started out there trying to get their PA systems going.
Yeah, and I think you got started with what really drew you into that side of it was the DBX 260 drive rack system, correct?
Yeah, I swear it was fate. I had an analog crossover that literally junked out on me on a gig, and so then that forced us to have to get a new crossover. And my brother-in-law, who plays in a band, who owned a recording studio and he owned his own PA, that kind of thing, he's like, well, what you really need to get is some kind of speaker management system to where, you can set crossover up the way that you want. You can apply high pass filters, low pass filters. They've got different things in there like tunings and stuff like that, so you can see if your speakers are in there and all that. So I started messing around with that, and I would keep seeing things in the drive rack that, like, if you have this speaker, then use these tunings, or use this other tuning or whatever. And I'm like, what is this tuning thing about? So then I started, checking it out and finding out that, well, it's a few sets of parametric EQs being applied to this speaker box. Well, what does that do? Then it comes to find out, that after you dig into it a little bit, that's what it takes, for to get that speaker at a flatter frequency response. Which is a lot of what we're trying to do out there in the field, where we're trying to minimize the hype and all the different interactions going on and try to make it smooth and that kind of thing. So, the drive rack, by having that and then being involved on the DBX forum, got to be friends with the moderator on it. His name's Gary Parrott. I'm not sure that he's moderating today, but he was for quite a few years. He also goes by the name Gadget. So he pretty much started working with me on this, and I'm not quite sure why, but I think it's because I think he sensed that I would listen and apply everything that he said. And I pretty much did. I took notes, I saved emails, and I literally dove into this thing all that time, learning it and learning it. And then, on the forums, you'll run into the guy, and there's a guy from Rational that I would run into out there on the forums. I'll tell you who he is later, but he used to be an instructor, but he would say, well, I find that when I work with top of the line stuff, I just prefer to work with top of the line gear. And I'm thinking to myself, well, who wouldn't?
Right.
But when you don't have the budget for it, or you're doing a lower level gig, you really got to try to extract out of what you're working with as much as possible. So that's the place that I've been at for a long time, is making the gear that you have, try to make it be the best that you could possibly make it. Now today I'm on systems where exactly what he was talking about, where, a lot of that work has been done. The manufacturer is taking care of a lot of that. I'm not sure how much we actually have access to post crossover parametrics anymore, unless you're completely taking control of every aspect of the system. A lot of guys today, they may have some DSP control on the front end of it, control of the input section, that kind of thing. So just diving into all that and learning that's really was the moment for me to where I'm like, God, man, the better I get this system tuned and all that, I know the better that my mixes are going to be. So I felt like I was learning system tuning for a much longer period of time than I never felt like I got to, let me back up. I never felt like I really got around to mixing as much as I wanted to, even though I was mixing shows, because I was more dialed into trying to get the system set where it needed to be.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So nowadays I just go, turn it on and I go, and still can get some great mixes. So
Yeah, there's something to be said for the active systems and all of the FIR tuning that, goes into that. And they really do account for a lot of things. And the DSP is so much better than it was even a couple of years ago. But it's good that you really focus on that, the tuning aspect, and that your book focuses on, getting people introduced to the basics of, sound systems and all the components, and, measuring things to make sure that stuff is in phase, or that you don't have something that's, blown. Your book is really good. I bought it a couple months ago and read it, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
I would have just sent that to you, right?
I got to support my friends. All my friends are supporting the podcast and other endeavors. So I figure, I'm happy to buy a book if it helps out a little bit. So,
Well, I appreciate that.
yeah.
Just like what you said, it's, that book helps people to realize, if they go through it, that there's a whole chapter dedicated to examination, examining all the parts, verifying that everything works, all of that, plus, even polarity.
Yeah.
So, half of the systems that I've gone out and helped friends with, that they're trying to make this system that they put together, make it work right, you're finding all kinds of things that are wrong with it, things that are out of polarity, even monitor wedges where, they've blown a horn in the past and they slapped a generic horn in it, and then they didn't even get it wired right. So going through unraveling all that stuff, it's one of them things that, like 95% of all my work that I've done was either done in my driveway, my backyard, or at the shop before going to the gig. And I'm just kind of pointing that out in there to the guys that, that are doing the lower level gigs, that are bought their own PA, or they're putting together old systems, which a lot of, the listeners that you have today, I've seen some of those guys that, that you've interviewed, and they're definitely they're definitely in a different league there, mixing on some of the best gear available, and that is awesome.
Yeah, they make me jealous every time I talk to them because, they're talking about, speccing out rigs and whatever equipment they've got, and it's stuff that I can really only dream about or hope to use for a little bit of time.
Right.
Yeah.
But I've got good friends that are, they're so I'm helping those guys out too. So
Yeah.
that's where a lot of this, the book comes in, is helping people that are still trying to get to that next level.
Yeah.
And, eventually they'll be able to buy nicer, gear and that kind of thing. And then they'll realize, oh, I don't have to spend so much time measuring or doing all this or that. So,
Yeah. It is funny. When I was on tour last fall with Stitched Up Heart, we ran into a number of PAs that had pretty significant issues. One venue, 3 of the 4 subwoofers weren't working, and the right side of the PA, all of the mid, it was a 3-way system. All of the mid-range drivers were blown, and then I can't tell you how many venues. One side of the PA was out of polarity. The phase was off. It's shocking to me that can happen.
yeah, it does. And, and I don't know, I don't know how or why that is. You would think that somebody there that's running the venue, or whoever's in charge there would know, and and get somebody to help them get it fixed or something. But
Yeah, yeah,
but I'm on the other side of where, I don't go out and tour. I did that in the early days playing guitar, but now as a front of house guy, I'm work with the audio company, and and I freelance sound myself. I have my own rig and all that as well, to where I'm just catching the guys that come through town that are on the road, and not all of them have an engineer with them. In
sure.
fact, the majority of them don't. But I mean, that depends. You get into the arena gigs. Most of them have engineers with them. There's been a couple that didn't, so we would mix the show. And then there's some other smaller venues where the opening acts wouldn't have an engineer, so then we would do those shows. So
Yeah, yeah. No, it is. It's surprising, but I'm grateful for that because that's how I got hooked up with Stitched Up Heart. Was they toured? They didn't have a staffed front of house engineer, and they were touring with Godsmack and Volbeat and Hailstorm, and pretty big acts playing stadium or arenas, and relying on either the headliners, front of house guy. And so luckily I was able to talk them into hiring me, and I'm grateful that they didn't have a sound guy permanently. So otherwise my life would have ended up not as fun and exciting.
right.
So one of those guys that you mixed in a bigger venue that didn't have a sound guy was Corey Feldman and his band of Angels.